I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hi, I'm Toni Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. Well, I am delighted to have as our guest today, Melanie Littlejohn, Vice President of Customer and Community Engagement for National Grid. I wanted to talk about what it takes to be a savvy leader. And when I look at you, I see a woman who has been able to navigate her career in a corporate environment. Very different from a nonprofit environment, very different from being an entrepreneur. So I would like to know, what do you see as those attributes of yourself that made it possible for you to achieve where you are today?
First, thank you, Toni, for inviting me, and thank you for the promotion. I appreciate that. When I think about my career journey, I think about a couple of the key things that I think have been those things that I've carried with me.
Okay.
Grace under fire.
Grace under fire. Okay. Right.
You should keep grace under fire.
Right.
Understand who you are, what you bring to the party. And the last, well, there's two more pieces. Don't let people live in your head rent-free.
Okay.
Evict them.
I like that. Don't let people live in your head rent-free, evict them. Okay.
And have your is it me circle. Right. And when you bring all of those things together, you know that becomes your resource guide to both surviving and thriving in big organizations, including corporate America.
I want to understand what, don't let people live in your head rent free. What does that mean? What does that mean?
So my college roommate actually wrote, she was a poet, and one of her poems was about letting people live in your head rent free, meaning that if you let people infiltrate your mind with their narrative and or perceptions about you, sometimes you began to believe the hype of someone else at the peril of yourself.
Exactly. That gets into codependency, but anyway. Yeah.
That's another show.
Yeah, isn't it? Because I really want to dig into codependency, but anyway.
Right, but that actually becomes the number one thing that I think you need to do.
So it's basically internalizing someone else's perception of yourself.
Yes, and starting to believe someone else's narrative about you or perception about you that runs counter to what you know of yourself in terms of your skills and ability.
So how did that protect you in corporate America? How does that mindset, how did that help you achieve in corporate America?
I shut down the noise. Right? Redirected the narrative in different ways. I redirected the narrative, whether I'm responding to someone's perception negatively of skills, ability, capacity, capability, or through action.
Did you have naysayers as you were moving along your career?
Yeah, I had both naysayers and I also had some allies.
Champions, right? Right.
Yeah, I've had them both. Sometimes not at the same time.
Interesting. Right.
And sometimes I had them both in the same room.
Wow.
Right? And that's okay. That means if I can get you and keep you talking, you still remain relevant in the work and value that you bring.
When you came to National Grid, how did you start?
Believe it or not, I actually came in from the Urban League.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Okay.
Prior to me joining
Mm-hmm.
National Grid 2+ decades ago, I was also an executive director of the Urban League. And prior to that, I worked in international banking on Wall Street.
So you definitely had the leadership toolkit, so to speak.
I had the leadership toolkit, the experience to know how to navigate in so many different arenas. I have an authentic leadership style, which some days I know I don't always fit nicely or narrowly into any one box. So when I started the organization, I was coming out of a nonprofit setting.
Okay, right.
And focused on advocacy. And so I started my work here 28 years ago, focused on diversity and compliance. So that's how I started in the utility industry. And as I progressed through my career, I remember one of our senior vice presidents came to see me and he said, all right, time for you to now take what you've built here, and I want you to move it to this side of the business.
So you got tapped then.
Yes.
Someone tapped you.
Right.
Okay.
That's why I said it was
anointed and appointed you in a way.
Exactly.
Right. Now, what about those sisters or those BIPOC women that don't have that? That was an opportunity. What would you say to those that don't necessarily have that opportunity where somebody watches you and says, I want you to move ahead?
Same rules apply. Right? Do a good job even when no one is watching. Grace under fire. Because somebody is going to poke you.
Doing a good job while no one is watching. Do you feel that hard work is recognized?
No,
when we do it?
Not always. Not always.
Right.
No, not always. Right? So how do you ensure that your work continues to get the value it deserves? And it's about talking about it. Talking about it through every twist and turn. Talking about it in ways in which you're connecting the story for someone who might not always see the story of the value of the work you bring.
Now, talking about it, how do you create the opportunities to do that? Because that is such great advice.
Raise your hand for assignments. Show up, do your thing for those assignments. But that's not easy.
No, it's not, because sometimes people see your hand raised and they don't call on you.
They don't call on you. They don't call on you because of a perception of who you are, your capability, and or talent. How do we stay in the ring?
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to go back to that, but I wanted to kind of bring in the diversity piece when you came here. Now, that was 28 years ago. What did diversity look like then? And is it the same diversity that we see today?
It's an evolution of the same discussion. It's an evolution of the same discussion. I think when I started doing this work 28 years ago, it was about defining what diversity was.
And we're still doing that
and
today,
we are
right?
Still doing it today. And sometimes the conversation of having to repeat it over and over again is,
well, it looks inauthentic too. It's like, what is this, the flavor of the month? How come people can't understand that it's diversity, it's equity, it's inclusion, and it's also belonging.
It's belonging, right? And we know when we create a sense of belonging for anyone, what do? When you feel as though your voice matters, your work matters, what you bring to the table matters, that's creating someone who is vested, committed, and really wanting to support organizations in a bold and big way. It is such a simple concept, but one of the most difficult things I've either experienced, having to navigate.
I want to add to that.
Create.
Yeah, because I was asked that question, what isn't inclusion, belonging? And I said that it looks very different. And I gave an example. I talked about how when I was brand new to Con Edison, because that's the company that I came from, and I had to speak before the chairman. And so they have a meeting of all those direct reports that had to speak. And after the meeting was over, a gentleman came over to me and he says, Toni, do you understand what they were talking about in there? I said, yeah, I think I've got my presentation lined up. He said, well, let's go through it. Let's talk about it. Let's just talk about it. Make sure that you've got it the way that you want it. And it was excellent, but that helped me feel like I belonged.
Absolutely. You know when people are vested in your success.
Right. Exactly.
You know that. Right. You know it because it shows up in a way that matters to you at the end of the day. And then you know when people are giving you lip service too. You know when someone is giving you lip service. And it's important to distinguish both.
I have a question that comes to me a lot is how do you manage people that are in your environment that aren't for you, and say it's a supervisor who's really not for you. You might be working as hard as you can, getting the work done, but for some reason, they don't see your potential or they see your potential and they're threatened by it. So they hold you down.
And maybe this is just something for me as I've gotten wiser.
Yeah, and you know what? The Melanie of 28 years ago is not the Melanie today, right?
The Melanie of 28 years ago would have probably had a direct conversation in a way that someone may not have been able to hear me because of the way I might have approached.
But at least you approached it, though. There's something about I believe you gotta say something.
You have to say something. Always say something. That's where grace comes in. Grace under fire. You want to say something so you can be heard.
Right.
Because if you say something and you're not heard, it becomes something else.
Right.
Defensive, not a team player, doesn't understand the business, all of these things. So you have to figure out how you can communicate in a way in which you can be heard.
So you're suggesting that in situations like that, you would confront your supervisor, but making sure that there is an opening for listening. So what does that look like? Meaning, what are the kinds of things that one would say to create that kind of listening? From your perspective, of course.
Sure. I think you always start from a place of, I'm sure that you're not intentional in how you are interfacing with me on this issue. But here's how I'm hearing this. What can we now do to reverse how I'm hearing it and maybe even how you're seeing it?
Oh, that's such good advice, because it's keeping it positive and not going in with negative, just keeping it so that the conversation, like you said, so that one can create the listening.
Because sometimes even when everything that you have is screaming pain and or hurt, grace under fire helps you elevate your message.
Now I'm going to unpack something else. Grace under fire. Now, when you say that, you mean keeping your calm, keeping your dignity while people are coming at you. Is that what you mean when you say grace under fire?
Absolutely.
Right. And what does courage look like to you in a situation like that? Because I've seen many, and you're in a male-dominated workspace. So there's not only do you deal with issues related to being BIPOC, but you also deal with issues related to gender. And you don't want to look too soft, but then you don't want to look hard because then they'll call you bossy. You don't get to be called assertive, strong, and just a clear-headed leader. You're bossy, So
interestingly, a big part of my role is external affairs and customer. There have been instances where I might walk into a meeting with one of my just fantastic folks that I have an opportunity to work with every day. And I recall when I first started this role that I'm in now, about 18, 19 years ago, doing some variation of it. A customer, one of my first visits was with the customer. And when I walked in the room, he asked my person on my team, "Oh, I thought you were bringing your boss."
Oh, there you go. Yes.
And I said, "Hi, I'm Melanie Littlejohn. I am the boss. Now close your mouth because flies may get in."
Oh, you said that? That? All right. And he chuckled, right?
He chuckled.
Laughed. He got it.
No, I didn't.
Right.
I know. But thank you. So now let's get started with how might we be able to help you. Right? Snatch back your narrative. And, right? Because that interaction was dismissive. You did not see me.
Right.
Right.
But we can't carry that.
You can't.
You got to rise above that.
Right. That is your bag to
exactly.
carry.
That's not you.
That's not you. My bag.
That's not you.
But I'm not going to let you give me your bag to carry. You keep your own bags to carry. Right. You have to recognize that I'm in the room.
So you also talk about being a servant leader. I mean, in my research, talk to us about what that means from of course, your perspective and your background.
Sure. I said I learned about servant leadership from the best two people in my universe, my parents, right? It was always about how you help support others. So as a servant leader here with my team, my work, my commitment is how I support my team, how I support my community, and how do I do it with my full self. And you know what? Some days that is good, and some days it's really tough because when you lead and serve with your whole heart, it can be exhausting.
It certainly can. It certainly can. So how do you pull back some of that energy so that you're not exhausted? Because oftentimes, yes, when you're leading from a place where you're compassionate, you're warm, you're interested, you care about the people that you genuinely, regardless of gender, their race, you know.
Care about them.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you take care of yourself?
I would be less than honest if I said I do it well all the time. I don't.
Right.
Because there's so much work to be done. But we got to get to balance. We got to get to self-care. So what I have really focused on now is having one day that I don't look at emails, that I don't dial in, that I separate, and I put up protective barriers around me. And I select that one day a week. I select that one day a week as my self-care moment, my decompress, move away, to try to rejuvenate.
Was wondering about how you feel about companies structuring, a process where people can move forward through either mentors or sponsors or champions. Do you see that as a real method or a strategy for moving your career forward? Because to me, so much of it seems organic, like it just kind of happens naturally, like someone tapped you on the shoulder. You didn't have to, you weren't going through that kind of a process.
That's a tough question. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough question because I think it can be when someone sees you.
Right.
Right.
So, and you look for that, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. The wrong person's looking at you.
The wrong person. And the wrong person is seeing.
Right.
Probably a part of you incorrectly.
Right.
And that's where being really conscious and dialed into who you are. Mm-hmm. What are your hard lines in the way you operate, the way you lead? Mm-hmm. There will be some that will get their arms around that and be either allies or sponsors or mentors. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes that just won't happen.
That's right. It just doesn't happen. Right.
And so how do you then think about what's important to you and get it in other places, mm-hmm. right? Sometimes mm-hmm. you just have to say, I'm a round peg in a square hole here. Or I am the invisible woman or the invisible person. I need to go where someone can see, recognize my talent. So sometimes you got to make those decisions.
That's a really, really good point, because I look at my career and how I moved out. Mm-hmm. The idea is, if I didn't feel as if I was showing my best self, I taught, I was an adjunct professor for a period of time. I have, of course, the television show. I lead a number of nonprofit boards. So exactly, there's other ways. It doesn't have to be right here in this box.
Right. Expand.
Exactly.
Right. T-Mobile has your Fab Five. Mm-hmm. So think about who's your Fab Five? What are, and I'm speaking metaphorically, what are those things that are important to you that you need to dial into? So mm-hmm. if it's nonprofit service, if it's the arts, mm-hmm. if it's, what are those things mm-hmm. that are important to you, and always lean into them so that you don't keep yourself like this, exactly. in a hole, mm-hmm. in a box. Expand. And
that leads into stepping out of one's comfort zone, because I really feel that when you the first day that I walked into my company, I had just left the Agency for Children's Services at that point, and it was pretty much all BIPOC women. And then I walk into Con Edison and it was predominantly white male. And I remember saying to myself, what have you just done? Because I was wondering, how am I going to fit here? And it gets into stepping out of one's comfort zone. How important do you feel it is to step out of a comfort zone as you try to navigate a career?
You will have to, depending on where you go for your career, you have to step out of your comfort zone, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. That's really about just staying in the ring. Right. Staying in the ring is about being outside of your comfort zone.
Another thing that I don't think we do enough of as women and as BIPOC people is, how do we support each other in environments like this?
I like to search out and look for opportunities to connect.
Interesting. So look for opportunities to connect.
Look for someone that might be alone. Mm-hmm. I look for that person and person of color who's standing by themselves. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Reach out, connect, because sometimes they may be having a hard time navigating. I used to make it a point of understanding of all of the new people coming into the organization. And I would reach out, connect, help them understand what holes I stepped in, what things they need to think about as they navigate, not only navigate an organization, but navigate your career. Who are the people that you're going to put around you, both in and outside, to help you think through how you navigate? But I often think, all right, Littlejohn, you are coming to the end of a chapter, mm-hmm. right? But why do you want to continue to stay to focus on the next wave of leaders? I feel it's my responsibility.
Absolutely. Now, how do you also, and this is deal with those times, because we're all human, where you feel vulnerable in an area, or you might not feel that this is something that you know all that you want to know about, but you still have to project that you're a leader and you're in charge. How do you deal with those kinds of issues?
You know, not having all of the answers is okay. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I am so cool with not having all of the answers.
Right. So that doesn't define you. You don't need to be that leader that has to know everything because they think, you know.
Because whose construct of leadership is that? It's not mine.
Right.
I'm okay saying, I don't know the answers, but can you help me?
Right. Right.
Can you help me find those answers? Can you give me those answers? Because I'm going to lean on you because I value you. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. That is who I am as a leader. You know, and sometimes folks read it as, oh, well, you're passing. No, I'm not passing the buck. I'm actually respecting and valuing you and your expertise.
Exactly. And I love that word, valuing. Melanie, what I've enjoyed about this conversation is that, again, wonderful insights and wonderful points of view. I've spoken to a number of leaders and each one has given me yet another gem. So thank you so much for just being on Brooklyn Savvy. I hope to have you on again because the work that you are doing is very influential and the path that you have blazed for yourself is going to be inspiring to a lot of young women that watch this show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Certainly. And we will see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.